Spanish Journal of Science. Ref, la ref. He's now the editor.
Thank you also, Ecomas.
Thank you. So thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this doctoral colloquium. It's very nice to be here with friends and also, of course, thanks to our finding institution. It's very important to get some funds and support. So hopefully they'll enjoy these sessions and we can continue to obtain this kind of funding. When I talked with Jacobo about the topic of this session, we discussed it would be about research practices, and then I saw that on the, actually I saw it yesterday, that it's called good research practices, and I got a bit nervous because I'm not sure that I can actually talk about good research practices. I can give you some views on perhaps what I think are good research practices, but please just stop me as we go at any point, because I have maybe a lot of material, and if no one stops me, I can probably go through. But otherwise, I think it's less interesting. So also any comments or questions you have about my experience as an editor, reviewer, author, I'm very happy to let you know. So of course, when we do research, we want to publish, right? It's not necessarily the best final outcome, right? If we do good research and we engage with the stakeholders and we discuss our research with the IAT, with IFRAG, with ACCA, if we influence some companies to change their KPIs, then that is also an impactful element of our research. And I think increasingly we are gaining this understanding that publication is not just the only thing that we should do with our research, but typically we think in this private project and we hope that it will get to eventual publication. And what we see in later years is that this process typically has become very lengthy. It takes a long time to get our papers through, many years sometimes, because the process is not just typically in one journal. So with a journal, it gets rejected, and then we go to another one. And through this revising the papers, when we finally get the papers through. And so we have this very slow process. And in the meantime, another element that has happened is the growth in or the appearance of many other journals, right? Some of these journals are what we call predatory journals, for quality, and this emergence of these other journals creates a lot of confusion when we're trying to target journals, when we're trying to say, where should I aim with my publication, with my research, where should I publish it? And therefore, I think this is happening very clearly also in accounting, that we've seen also because of the topics we're tackling. And I think that's an interesting change, that a lot of the things that we do are not just pure core accounting, right? We're not just talking about conservatism or management, but now we're doing things that are broad in scope, and so we can also target journals management, finance, and this also opens the possibility of having more growth. Now, what do I think are some emerging areas, right, that are appearing and that perhaps are things that we want to think about? Further, it's linked with the non-financial information, which is the new revolution, right? And it's something where we have a lot to say as accountants. So in preparing this, whatever you call the ESG or sustainability, financial, and I think here reflecting on what is the use of this information, who are going to use this data and for what purpose, is what is interesting, because we have this mentality of relevance, resource presentation, and this is useful for investors. But now there are classes, new classes of users, right, that we can study and that we can think, how are these new classes of users using information? What is their objective function? What do they need? What decisions are they making, right? Are they doing what exactly with this information? And how can we perhaps think of new properties of information, right? Spatial, complexity, linguistics. Are these new important properties of information? Are these the key properties in a sustainability report? When I talk about gender, how do I need to think about this information, what makes that information useful for what kind of students. Of course, there's all these areas that Marta was talking about, students, right? Materiality, connectivity. So these are emerging topics that I think are interesting. Then we have all this emergence of the narrative, right? The text. Because we've been looking at the numbers for years, and now we have the actual text. And we have all these new communication channels, right? We have the podcast that was being studied, right? And we have Twitter, and we have social media, and we have TikTok, and we have YouTube. And we have all these other things that we can have study, but I think bring a lot of interesting channels to analyze both professional information, non-professional information. So a lot of new opportunities linked with also these issues which I think have real impact. Because I've done a lot of work on things like accounting conservatism, right? And conveying the importance of that type of research to people on the street, right? When someone asks you to have a coffee, to what's your research about? They, well, I'm looking about, earnings management and accrual manipulation. They're like, okay. Okay. But now we have all these other things, right? Like climate change, diversity, modern slavery. It needs measuring. And this is where we're good. That's our edge, right? That's what we do better than anything. So we can do all these things, and we can think of the properties that information should have to actually measure these issues in a way that can be conveyed and that companies can be held accountable. So we have the tools to actually now enter a lot of literature where we've not been present, and where we can talk to regulators and practitioners about how they produce these new reports, right, and how they advance. Right? Now, I'll give you two examples that I like a lot about papers that are in these new or emerging areas. The first one is one of my favorite recent papers. It's an accounting paper that doesn't know it's an accounting paper, but I would be very happy to tell these people that I really enjoyed doing accounting paper. So it's in science. It's about behavioral nudging. And so what they document, these people, is that in New York and in the US in general, it's very common to get a citation to appear in court. So if you're a bit disorderly, so yesterday we came out of the restaurant, they were shouting, laughing, and there was a police car. Did you see the police car? It would be very easy for all of us to get a citation because we were on the street, some of us were drunk, and then it's very minor thing, right? So you get this ticket, and you say, now you have to come to court, and then a few months later you appear in court, and the judge says, yeah, okay, it's no problem. You were just misbehaving a bit on the street, shouting or speaking a bit loudly, it's fine. But a lot of people in the US do not show up for these citations. For these very small misdemeanors, it's not a big issue. The fact that you do not show up is a big issue. Because now you have a criminal record. And when you have a criminal record, it means next time you do not stop at a traffic light, you have a criminal record. And then you go directly to another route of problem. And so what these people said was, look, this is the form that you get, the ticket that you get from the police officer. And this is how it's structured. And the thing is here, you cannot actually see the main thing, which is when do I have to show up in court? You get all this other information. So they say, let's redesign the form. So they redesign the form. What do you need to do? One, show up in court, right? And it may seem that this is purely about information presentation. This is what we do. IFRS 1 and now IFRS 18, right? Presentation of information. And this, they show there is a huge impact on this small appearance in court that changes the lives of many people because you no longer have a criminal record thanks to this little change, right, in the form. This is a science paper, okay? So it's an accounting paper in science about how to design the ticket that the police officer gives you, how to present the information, the headlines. Garna is an expert in headlines, right? So it's impression management literature applied to a real life. The other one is this paper in JAR, which is how does carbon footprint information affect consumers. So it's a field experiment that some German colleagues have run in the cafeteria at the university. So what they did was they produced this kind of information, right, in the cafeteria about whether, what you were going to eat at, and they put color codes, right, and they give different information in terms of the CO2 impact. So if you have pasta versus salad, right? Some of it would be like green. It's like very simple thing, right? And they give you the information either with no color or with colors, and they give you the information in terms of whether it's CO2, whether it's a budget, or so they changed a bit how the information again is presented, and then they showed that people were actually influencing their choices for eating food in the cafeteria, depending on what kind of information you got on the panels. Right? This is, to me, it's an, I mean, this is in JAR, okay? So it's, JAR people also agree it's an accounting paper, right? But maybe it's not the way you're thinking about accounting. Huh? Maybe this is not the kind of when you think, what is a good accounting paper, a recent accounting paper with real impact? So one is about less people going to jail. The other one is about eating better and contaminating less, choosing meals that potentially have a lower impact on the environment. So I think there is this exciting new literature that's coming up that also it's a lot about field experiments. So field research is gaining traction, and I know it's very costly to do this kind of things for PhD students, right? It's established project, but I think we should try, right? So when I think about the quality of papers, right, it's, and I recommend this paper, I talk about this paper a lot, right, is the Ellison paper in 2002, and she talks about, or she thinks about the quality of the paper in terms of the Q and the R, and she says, Q is your research question. What is your research question? I always tell my PhD students, you should start your paper with a research question, an actual question, the question mark. If you don't have this, right, a clear, short, you still don't have a report. So and this happens sometimes, particularly when you're doing your PhD, right? Someone asks you, what are you doing? You need 5 minutes, 10 minutes to explain your research question. You don't have it. If you have a research question, it's easy to convey. Quick, it's fast, clear. You're asking something, right? So that's why there's a question. Now, this is the paper. That's the beginning and the end of the paper. That's perfect. If the research question is interesting, that's the cue of your paper. And a reviewer will give you a chance to revise the paper, even if they don't like anything after that first. Because it means that the paper is novel, it's new, it tackles something that hasn't been done before, and the contribution is inherent to the research question. You can try to push, right, a lot, and you can try to say, well, I'm going to look at this same question in a slightly different setting, and I'm going to disaggregate this, and I'm going to, but these are small contributions, right? There's a little bit squeezed out of a question that have been studied many times before. But if the question is truly something new, right, this would be your cue, and that's the key element in terms of the paper. And it's composed of this, right? What is the motivation? What is tension, right? We were joking yesterday. It's important that the answer is not obvious, right? If we know the answer immediately, that means the paper is slightly less interesting. Descriptive evidence is always useful, but to the extent that you can have good story for why, look, you should dedicate the next 15 minutes of your life to at least go through my introduction, because this is novel and you don't know the answer. You think you know it, but it's not so obvious, so you think it's so straightforward. Then I think it's important. And then, of course, this is what we said, the contribution, right? Like, how are we adding to existing research? Or so challenging. For example, the last paper presented about gender. We do know there's this literature, right, of how gender is linked to perhaps some properties in the general population, and how that may lead to more emphasis on CSR or ESG, right, behavior. So what is the contribution? What is new about what you're saying? Are you somewhat challenging it? Are you saying too many women is not good because you have these other consequences? 100% women is not good. So there's this tipping point, and what is this tipping point happening? So in this literature, when you try to enter a literature that's somewhat split, the concern is always that you're just going to join one of the piles, right? So there's this pile that says the answer is yes, there's the other pile that says the answer is no, and your paper is going to be one more in one of the piles. No one is going to really think this added meaningfully anything. So when you tackle that literature where there is a puzzling result, you need to at least try to identify one small thing that you're going to resolve. You're going to say, look, this literature has this issue because they're using this database. And I'm going to only fix on this. I'm going to try to say, look, if you don't do this decoupling by looking at the difference, but you take the difference divided by the value, but then you get different things. Right? So don't use that. And we get that takeaway from your paper, and we would say, look, I read that paper, and now I understand this one thing. So one takeaway from one paper is amazing. We managed to be the paper that shows one thing and the people remember. You know, Bea's paper is the one that shows this thing. This is really good because you've had this one big contribution, right? One big question, big question. Now, of course, theory has to be well developed, but it kind of flows, right? Because the theory is the answer to the question. So, and you can have both answers sometimes. Then there's the rest. Okay? Then is the actual paper. So first is the question that you have, and it's an interesting question, and it seems that it's well motivated, and we care about the answer, and it's not obvious. And then you have all these other things, logical rigor, data, reviews, statistical analysis. You want to do this properly, huh? But this is always fixable. In my own experience, in being an editor as well as a reviewer, an author, if the reviewer, author, the reviewer or the editor is identifying a flaw with the top three things, this is fatal. You're not going to get a chance to that. If the problem is somewhere here, right? Definitely if it's somewhere here, it's always fixable, right? If they tell you, why don't you do this additional analysis, why don't you do it? It's another thing that once you do the additional analysis, the whole thing crumbles, then it's a problem, okay? But you can always do it, right? It's not a Now, in the middle, that's where it might get more challenging, because of course, right now, there is, particularly in empirical financial accounting, there is a demand for exogenous variation and the use of experimental settings or quasi-experimental settings. So if you do not have these, and the setting is very instructive, it sometimes is not easy to think of a way to fix that. And that may lead to questions about the contribution, right? Because they can say these are just associations, and we're not sure that you're adding meaning, right? Because you're the fit paper in this. Now, I think that the ideal distribution would be dedicating a lot of time to the question. We organized a symposium also in the summer, where we typically invite Hans Christensen, who's a very good researcher. He's from Denmark, but he's down in Chicago. And he always says that he writes his ideas as a one page. Just a question, right? Motivation, and what would be the best way he can think right now of testing this question. And then he saves the paper, because maybe he thinks, look, I haven't yet found the setting or the method that allows me to test this very interesting research question, but I will keep my idea. And he has this one page. And he dedicates a lot of time and effort to that, to choose the question, right? To think through. But he doesn't start the project. He only keeps the idea because he thinks, look, with the current method, with the data I have, the answer to the question is just not going to be convincing enough. But the question is interesting in itself, so I will save it later. Because developing this bit, the actual test, the data, time consuming, but it's actually lower contribution. Okay, the biggest contribution. Then, of course, you have to dedicate time to presenting the paper before you submit. Now, probably what we do is quite different, right? We get the data and then think about the question, right? I'm just going to get all these reports, and I have some idea about I want to do something about auditing, but I'll think about it later, right? This is not easy. Coming up with a good question after you've actually done the data and collected it, and try to see what does the data tell me. Does it speak? It's like, speak to me, right? It doesn't truly speak to us a lot. So then, increasingly, I think we don't dedicate enough time to this hard side of presenting and review, because we want to submit, right? And of course, what happens when you submit the first time, if it's not presented the paper, is you get rejected, and the reasons are comments that you would have received if you presented the paper. So, and it's very frustrating, because you get this type of comments where you say, oh, I could fix that, I could have done that, right? So you cannot use the first bullet of perhaps the best chance or the best fit for your paper in a way that is disappointing. Now, what are we doing in terms sometimes of and I think as empirical accounting researchers go into these good practices, right? So dedicate a lot of time to the questions. Talk to people about your questions, right? Not so much about data setting shock, right? Because sometimes we are like, there's a new shock. I'm going to use it for something. So first, try to develop interesting questions in the literature, right? Then once you're constructing the data, there's a lot of things in research that we do, and I think for anyone who's a critical financial accountant, they would agree with me that we make a lot of choices as we construct the data. So because we make all these decisions, right, what happens is oftentimes our papers do not replicate. And this is increasingly a concern, that the fact that something does not replicate makes it look bad, right? Makes it look like you made it up, that you didn't take care enough. This is a very nice paper. It's published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. This is one of the really top. I encourage you to keep an eye on this, because also it's one of these journals that they've made an effort to publish papers in a way that people can understand them. So all papers are like 5-6 pages long, sometimes only 2 pages long. And of course, then you click on whatever the annex is, and then it's 150 pages paper, like the real academic paper. But the summary is always very easy to follow through. And so what these guys did, it's now Rinke Volstack, is they gave the same data to 73 teams around the world, and they gave them the same question. So I give you a data set, and I tell you, is audit quality impaired by providing non-audit services? And I give you the data. Auditors, non-audit services, proxies. And so these 73 teams tested the same hypothesis, but they gave them freedom. You do it, right? You just test the data, you test the hypothesis. Now what happened? These are the results from negative to 0 to positive, right? And you see the distribution basically means 25% of the teams had a negative result, 16% of the teams had a positive result, but 60% of the teams had no result. It was 73 very good teams all over the world. So it's not, and they were asking with the same data, testing the same hypothesis, but we give them freedom. You, with this raw data, you construct the, right, you do the cleaning. So all these steps that we take in terms of cleaning the data, etc., mean that about small percentage of it, right, could be traced back, the differences, right, in results, could be traced back to how the materials, perhaps, the pre-analysis that were explained by the teams. So the teams provided a report. The typical thing we do, right? I download the data, I clean it, I merge, I blah, 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 blah. So that's what can be explained, right? Then there's this researcher decision, which is the green part, which would be, I think, how do you measure non-audit services? Right? Because I gave you a bunch of proxies, and maybe you said, well, I take the ratio of audit services plus non-audit services divided by total fee, or I only take one. So these measurement choices, right? The sample selection, the model specification, that explains about this much of the variance in the result. Then you have the characteristics of the people. And you say, okay, let's look at the 73 teams. Maybe some of them are more empirical archivists, maybe some of them have more experience in audit, right? Because they gave you an audit question, but you're an assurance person, so you don't know audit. Maybe you took some choices here that the yellow bit is unexplained. We don't know. Right? Something else happened. So from the report that was provided on choices we made, who we are, we can explain some of these variants from, and this is important. We have this implication because it means not only services should be removed, right? Because it impairs independence. No, it's actually good, right? It gives more independence to the auditor. We don't know, right? So out of the 70, how many hypotheses in our field are being tested by 73 independent teams? Very few. So we have the first result and we take it. Say, okay, done. Now let me do something more, right? So in a sense, I think we should be good practice, be as transparent as we can with the process, so that as much as possible people can replicate. If you can put your code up publicly, after maybe at the end, once you publish the paper, so that people can follow what you did and replicate what you did, I think that is very useful. Now, of course, in terms of our research agendas, the fact that we have or not access to resources matters a lot. So I think data access has been a source of competitive disadvantages for Spanish researchers. Most of us, we don't have CompuStat, CRIS, Word, all this data that is necessary to conduct research in top institutions, right? This, of course, multiplies if you then think of proprietary data, people who practice to, in Sweden, they have all kinds of admin data at the level of social security number, and they give it to you, to any research, or central bank data, right? You see these papers in JAE, which are published by the Bank of Spain, who does not share the data, right? So why don't they share the data? No, this Saurina and all these people, I'm happy for them in the JAE publication, well done, but they could share the data with other research, right? We could do more things if we have access to this data. Yeah, or you put the names on the paper, right? But I mean, there's low incentives to share, right? We have low incentives to share this data, and so whoever has access to it is like, this is my thing, I'm not going to share it with anyone. I do think that now R, Python, these skills that we're learning is an equalizer, and increasingly this advantage that they've had, at least in terms of the resources, is going to diminish. So we're going to be more competitive, and we're going to have access because all these resources we were discussing, social media, LinkedIn, this is available. And if you understand how to, if you teach yourself R, Python, all these new methods, then this is a democratizing of this data because everyone can access it, right? And then that helps a bit because then just the fact that your institution doesn't have 100,000 euros to buy the fee that this cost then is no longer. Now, I had it. You talk about ChatGPT. I was also like, should we use artificial intelligence, right? I think in terms, but this is just a question of to what extent can I use new methods and new tools that are available. I think it helps a lot with editing text, right? These obfuscation stories, so you can prompt ChatGPT, cut my text, or help me with this. You can maybe help you with the code, right? So you've written the code, and you can maybe ask this kind of artificial intelligence to do also better. But I think it's very dangerous. We don't know yet what journals are going to consider ethical standards in terms of use of ChatGPT and similar artificial intelligence. We don't know what tools they may develop to detect that we've used these kind of tools in our research. And do not forget that it is generative. It makes stuff up. Right? This, for example, has been an issue in accounting. So some Australian academics, they've been caught in this problem where they actually use ChatGPT, not, I think they use Google Bard, right, to search for cases of audit fraud. And they even prepare a report that they send to the Australian government. And apparently Bard, this Google Bard, it just made it up. Right? Because this is what it does. It generates. So it's generative, right? And so these academics who specialize in accounting, right, were urging parliamentary inquiry into the ethics and professional accountability of the consultancy industry, right? So we're pointing the fingers like KPMG, UI, etc. The KPMG, UI, etc. came back and said, look, this is made up. And then the academics have to say, well, we found these cases in Bard. So just be always very skeptical, right, of how you use these new tools, and don't immediately go for the next big thing until we understand ethical consequences, how the use of those tools is going to be seen by journals, what the policies are going to be. So suppose you've done your full study, right, and suddenly when you try to submit, they say, look, you've used artificial intelligence, you cannot submit the paper here. And then what do you do, right, with the last year of your research? So it's important, therefore, I think in terms of good practices, that we ensure that our papers can be reproduced, that other people can replicate. I think it's important if we want to enhance good practices to share code. So it's true that running someone else's code in your machine can lead to errors. Sometimes you take someone's code, you put that, even with later, right? I mean, simple things, it might not run, but people can read through the code, right? And they can get assurance that you've done it properly, and they can replicate it or adjust minimally, and then run your code. And I think and also through the license changes. So, but my advice is always keep a journal of all the choices you've made, either in the code, you annotate everything very carefully as you do the code, all your decisions. You try to make it as manually intensive as possible, so automate the whole thing. No, nothing that you do manually in the code. And also, and this is even for yourself, because sometimes you submit a paper, you don't hear about it for a year, and then when it comes back and you have to retrieve the code, you're like, oh my God, what was the last code that I used? And this doesn't run anymore. So it's just being kind to future you. Huh? So doing a good job in terms of ensuring that you can reproduce and that this can be given to other people. Huh? So when you submit the paper, before you click on submit, you should be 100% sure that if the editor calls you and says, send me the data and the code, you can send that within 2 minutes. Immediately, reply to the email. Here's the data, here's the code. You run it, it gives you the tables, right? So having this ready before submission is very important, right? Because it can happen that they ask you for the data and the code, right? And then you don't want to be 3 weeks later sending an email that says, well, I made a mistake. I'm sorry, because this is after you've submitted, so it looks very bad. Right? So you want to avoid this trouble for yourself. Think of your future self. Right? It's not uncommon that they ask you for this, for code and data, 5, 6 years later. So you want to have that. You want it to be clean, and you want it to be 100% sure that if someone asks for this, of course, here it is. Right? Okay. Exciting data doesn't mean contribution. Huh? So, and of course we'll fall through this, and then we see ChatGPT, podcast, and then we think, oh, this is exciting, but it doesn't mean contribution. We still have to think, right? How can I use this exciting new data that's available to actually ask something that is meaning, right? As I was saying, this reverse engineering of a good question into data is super hard. You might be good at this, okay? But 99% of people would not be very good at this, as fixing a good question from a data or even from a result. So it doesn't backfire. And then, of course, you have to, this thing, right, where artificial, even if you've used it, then you check it, right? Manual checks are a must. You must check your data. Whatever you've done, right? After every step, you run the code, you open the file, and you check. You run the code, you open the file, and you check again, right? So you must know your data generating process, the data quality, right? And you find the actual number that you have in your data set, the financial statements, right? Is there a match? Are you sure of that, right? Because the last thing you want is bad data, right? If the data is bad and you don't understand your data, or you're doing something to it that has changed, there's now a huge scandal with this physics guy at Duke, right? So it's about superconductivity. I have no idea what that is. But it's these metals, right, that can somehow be superconductors at room temperature, right? Because typically superconductivity is achieved at a very, very low temperature, and so it's for industrial processes, it's not easy. And so what they detected is this data, it just cannot. Right? They asked for the data, he sent the data, and it just didn't work. And he said, no, it's because I did this process to remove noise from the data. But and that gave him a bit of time. But once they figured out that, the raw data was still manipulated. Okay? So be very careful with your data, with the data generating process, that you explain all the steps, because this is very important. I do think that commercial databases are increasingly going to lose their relevance in research, and you see this also in journals in terms of new papers that are coming through are very much these new data sets that are of interest. But I do think that helps the little people in academia, because we don't have the money to pay for the commercial databases, but we can learn R, and we can learn Stata, and we can learn all these tools in the same way someone at Chicago. So here the advantage disappears a lot. It's our own effort into learning how to do this. And so I think here there's a I said, this, in terms of the good practices, right? This advice to try to share code with people and to ask for code as well, because once you share, these dynamics are very good, right? Always assume that within the next 5-6 years, someone may ask for the code, the data. It has to be ready. There's no excuse. You're gonna say, oh, it broke. It just doesn't flow. It has to be ready. You have to have it. So be careful with you store the data, how you keep it, so that it's your. And it also, I think it helps in terms of improving the state of the art, because you don't have to build your own code for the whole thing. You start with the code that someone else developed, and it's built. Right? So to search for novel data, I do think I've said data doesn't give you a question. But you have to keep an eye on the world, right? When the new data is coming available, or the new issues that exist, and this will give you also thinking about the accountant boundaries. What is accounting? So also think big about accounting. Huh? And I do think that the 50 studies are very interesting. So even just you say, look, I mean, this ChatGPT, retail investors, just understanding the world, how people are using that, providing that descriptive evidence, is super interesting. And of course, if you're the first paper out, people will cite you a lot. Now, where should I publish? Right? I think we should be optimistic, but not too much. There is a luck factor. It's random, randomly distributed. It will hit you. Sometimes it will be bad luck, sometimes it will be good. So you have to have sent to reasonably good journals for when the good luck hits you. Right? You want to be on this. Suddenly, the reviewer likes the paper, the editor is in favor. And that happens to you in a journal that you're like, if this happened to me in the other one, right? So that's why targeting also a bit the good journals, waiting for these luck factors to hit, it's important. It's not good to send low quality papers to good journals, because also it damages potentially your reputation. I do think if you think the paper is ready, you should wait. Read it again in 2 weeks' time. So you think, now it's ready, I'm going to submit, just wait. And then read it again in 2 weeks, and I assure you there's a typo on the first page. For sure. On the first, not even on the back. There's a huge typo on the first page. Now, we should choose the right journal, right? Whether it's, and I do agree that there's a point on being practical. What's the value of this publication for my CV in the short term and in the long term? What are the requirements of my institution, right? Where should I publish so I can get tenure, so I can get promotion, right? And this is important. Huh? So know what journals count in your institution, right? And of course, you cannot live with your back to the real world, so this is important to consider. Me, I like to publish in the journals that I like to read, right? That's what you hope. You hope to add to the conversation that is happening. Right? So what are the top journals in accounting? The top journals in accounting would be this top 6, right? Accounting Review, AOS, JE, JAR, CAR, RAS. And then we have very good international journals, right? Abacus, ABR, Accounting Forum, Accounting Horizons, AAJ, Auditing, right? So these are European Accounting Review. There's a lot, but it's not a long list, right? If you go to other disciplines, potentially there's more. Now, how hard is to publish in this list, right? So with Cristina, we did a very just descriptive analysis of how well have academic days in Spanish universities done in publishing in the last 10 years. So we went to I don't know, it's a Scopus. Okay, so if you go to Scopus, and I can later tell you what the journals that are included in Scopus as accounting, but they are the typical subjects. Okay, so all of the ones that you would think. So accounting academics or academics in Spain have published 1,900 papers in these accounting journals in the last 10 years. Right? That's our production as globally, 200 papers per year. Now, how many of these 1,900 have been in the good accounting or the top accounting journals? Right? So we've published 12 in the top 3, 2 from public universities, the other 10 are from IESE, AI, right? We've published 15 in the next 3, 4 from public universities, and 11 in the private universities, and 71 in the next 6. Okay, so the next 6 in quality, and of course you can criticize, you can say, oh, I know one other journal that could be the next one. So it would be like ABR, European Review, Journal of Public Policy, JBFA, MAR, auditing, 71. Now, that's not so good, right? If you think about our collective output in the last 10 years from all of the Spanish universities, having less than 100 papers, so that's 10 per year. The public system has, of the universities, was 80 universities. So it's like 1 paper per year per university in this job, right? But there's a huge amount of publications. So there's a lot of people who are publishing a lot. And my advice would be, because it takes so long, because it's so difficult to publish in these top journals, you need, and even including the next 6. So it's not just the top 6, it's also the next 6. I would say you need to have a few projects underway. So you need a portfolio paper. You cannot put all your effort in a single paper as a PhD student. You need to have 3, 4 projects that you're trying to get through at different stages. My advice is to start 1 project per year. If you start a paper every year, then as you publish it, there may be differences in terms of when they hit the journal, but typically you would have eventually 1 paper published per year, right? It's the idea, right? Sometimes you publish 2, and the next year nothing, and then next year nothing, and then nothing, and then nothing, and then 5. And then you say, oh, 5, right? But it's because you've done all these other things, right, of accumulating. Now, should I target other journals? We've done it. And Spain is the leading country almost in this, right? We're very good at so this is from ANECA in 2021. So if you see some of these editorial company firms that have emerged, right? Because this whole industry, it makes sense, right? This is management accounting, right? What you do get measured. So you tell me I'm going to give you promotion, tenure, accreditation, sexenio, because you publish in JCR, then there will be editorial policies that create journals that go into the JCR, so just that people can get their publication. So this is Spain. So we're a leading country. You can see we're a leading country in research, in the top 10 in getting published in all these questionable editorial companies that have emerged and that publish what have been called the predatory journals. What's the good thing about publishing in these journals? Well, it takes less than 2 weeks to get a decision. So that's obviously, if we were pressure for time, and I'm telling you about wait 6 years to get your paper through, you can get it in 2 weeks in some of these journals, right? So the incentive to publish in these journals is clear, right? Particularly if we want to have 5 and 6 years, it makes sense. Now, is this a good strategy? Well, ANECA is after it, right? This is published by ANECA, right? So they know that this practice exists and they're concerned about such practice, right? So the relative percentage of this type of publications in sexennial requests is tracing. You can see at the beginning, it may have been something that you do to fill the sexennial. So you have 4 papers, and then you say, what will I do to get the 5th paper? I will publish it in one of these journals. But increasingly, it's the percentage of, they call it acceso abierto, okay? Because they also have in the report, and I can send you the report if you're interested, they've made an estimation of how much money the ministry has transferred to this editorial in terms of money that the ministry gives you, so you can buy the publication in a way through open access publication. And it's in the millions of euros. Of course, that's what was the concern, right? Because, for example, to MBPD, these guys calculated between 2017 and 2019, the Ministry of Science transferred 20 million euros for publications in these typical journals. I think this is the public concern is on the rise about this. These are news that are appeared recently in newspapers. you don't understand. There's a bubble in scientific eating up millions of public money, right? Or there was also about a Spanish expert in some field about meat that he was publishing a paper every 2 days. Right? He's from Vigo. Ah, okay. I love did you see the article? The guy is like there is concern about this, right? Like how much time have you dedicated if you're publishing, one paper every 2 days, 175 papers in a year? Is this what we aim for, right? Is that why we do research, right? So it's questionable. Huh? I mean, it depends on your strategy. I think ANECA, as I said, is changing. They've issued this report, which is a strong signal that they are concerned about this. They've now changed the criteria for titulares, and so they're asking only for 5 contributions. So I think they want to stop these massive, 175 papers here. And of course, there's research in this, right? There's not in accounting, but more in economics, that only the top 5, only the big publications count, right? So all these other things that you do, so they call it the tyranny, right? Because it's very tough to publish in these top journals. And this is a paper in the Journal of Economic Literature, and the top 5 in economics are American Economic Review, Econometrica, Political Economy, the Quarterly Journal of Economics, and the Review of Economic Studies. And so they say that tenure is almost guaranteed if you have 2 of these publications within 10 years. If you manage to hit 2, so 100%. And what about outside of, right? If you are not so well cited, or if you publish somewhere outside this, right? Here A, B, other publications, this goes down. Okay, so it is valued, right? So the top 5 is the biggest element, and then other things are also counted. But of course, as the quality of the journal goes down, it's less and less counted. And actually, the other question is, but does it actually hurt my CV? So it maybe only helps me at the margin, right, to have these publications. Again, the evidence in economics suggests that low rank publications lower the judgment of the quality of your CV, even if it's the case that you also have the good publications. If you have really bad publications in your CV, even if you also have the good publications, this will lower the view that if you only have good publications, right, versus if you have only good publications plus some of these others, and then once you go, of course, you only have like the bad publications, then this is actually something that's not viewed as positive. So, and then it depends a bit on whether it's single versus a joint evaluation of the CV, but having a lot of these low quality publications that maybe you thought about having those publications to meet these requirements of ANECA or whatever, then over the long term, it suggests this kind of research that it may hurt your chances of over the long term. Maybe you achieve the objective in the short term, you get your tenure, or you get your, but definitely there is some question about whether it helps you, right, in the end. Now, in terms of some strategies, and I'm almost running, so I think we should always choose fields that we're interested in, because we dedicate a lot of time to this, right? So you have to think of issues where you are interested, and maybe if I can end here so we can have some discussion. I would say reading is the key, right? You read a lot. You read. Where should you read? Well, you should read accounting, but also these journals, right? The top 5 in economics, the proceedings of the National Academy, science, because they have all these interesting papers, which a lot of them are actually accounting or business or similarly related, right? And so Anna and myself, right, when we were PhD students, we were very lucky that we have Philip Brown teaches a seminar, and I think you were also there, right? Yeah. So Philip Brown is the famous, right, Boland Brown paper, and he gave us this advice, right? When you read a paper, discipline yourself to do this. Ask yourself, what would have I done differently? If it was me doing the analysis, what would have I done differently? If you can think of an answer to that, you have a paper. The contribution is not huge, right? Because it's just something you would have done differently. So maybe consider a different setting or a different model, different data or a different country. But that immediately gives you an idea. Then the second one, it's tougher, is can I think of an alternative explanation? I read this and I see this positive association being reported, but can I think of some other explanation for why this exists? That gives you a better paper, right? More interesting. You're going to tackle the same question, but you're going to discuss an alternative mechanism, right? And so that potentially is a great result. And of course, the third one is the biggest one, is what's next. Right? If I believe what I've read here and I understand what this means, then if I see the paper that you presented about ChatGPT and this is true and I believe it and I wouldn't have done anything differently because it's very well done, and I also cannot think of any alternative explanation, so I do think that managers are actually reducing obfuscation so that they no longer want to fool retail investors in this way. What's next? I could ask this question. I assume this is true, so they must be doing something else. What is the thing they're doing? Right? How has ChatGPT changed reporting practices from managers? Not just this, the use of retail investors, right? But that's the next question. If I believe everything, right? If I don't believe everything, then I first have to challenge your study, right? That's the first step. But if I think, I cannot challenge you, then I think you're right. Then there's next. What's next? What consequences, right? So that's another paper. The other way I think we can come up with very neat ideas is to identify the underlying assumptions, the building blocks. What is assumed away, but not done in the paper? Because that gives you like a prior of the paper. That typically is very interesting to be tested, the prior. And so also think a lot about this, identification, causality. If you're starting your project now, think about different terms about endogeneity, because I think the demand for good research methods that take into consideration is really very, very clear. And maybe if I can finish with, I saw this paper the other day, but it was maybe a good way to finish. Go for the big idea. Go for the big questions, because this nuance, this aggregation, small questions, it's important, okay? But if you can, as a PhD student, forget about nuance, right? Go for the big issues, the big questions. Try to change the world. Right? Be ambitious, and then you may end up with a paper that's very derivative from marginal contribution, but at least you start from this bigger perspective. Huh? And just in case you're curious, these are the journals that are included in this list of counting, right? You see, counting area, counting in finance, history of history, history accounting in euro, review. So the typical subject. Okay, so it's not that this 1900 is not. It's weird journal. Okay? So there's in this 1900, of course, there's some less accounting perhaps, but you see the ones that you would expect. Okay, so I think I'll finish here because almost time I didn't have any questions. So in case someone wants to also say something or contribute something, please. No, it's very rare that you get high checks of that. They might ask you about the fixed effect you've used or the clustering that you've used and why you've done that, and they may question whether you need that structure. But in terms of very specific elements of how you've done this, I've never had. Very rare. What I've had happen to me in the past is because I've been asked by the editor to send all the data and code, and so one person wrote like a comment on my paper. So what they did was they trimmed the data in different ways, they used different commands, and of course they got different results. Huh? But they could replicate my findings, which is the main thing, right? If you do things in the way it's said in the paper, this is what you get. Now, if I cut the sample in this way or I do this other thing, of course, there will be difference. And I don't think we should be worried about that, because this is what it is, right? If you say, if I only choose the biggest part of the sample, or the smallest, or the ones that are in Germany, then I might have different analysis or different results like you do, right? If you only pick from the risk component, then it switches, and this is not a problem, right? What you want is for your study to replicate, for your code to be okay without mistakes, and then people can question, can say, look, if you do it in a slightly different way, but that's not an ethical issue. It's the main thing you need to avoid, right? That there's an ethical concern about your code, not a researcher choice. That's okay.
Yes, I just want to share my feelings towards the publishing in accounting journals, because from the first year of PhD, my supervisor told me that as a PhD student, don't expect your paper published in those accounting journals, because there is a phenomenon of delay in those accounting journals. That means we must wait for longer time in compared with other type of journals. And what's your opinions for that? And I think that for us PhD students, expect to submit our papers to accounting journals.
I think, and that's what I'm saying, right? You need to keep in mind what are the objectives that you have, right? So where do you want to go later, right? If you want to enter international job markets and you want to apply for positions in Europe, in the US, then you have to keep in mind that the system is very different from Spain. So these type of publications that will be acceptable here, because if a lot of people are carrying on doing these type of things, it's not acceptable elsewhere. So if you go out into the job market with a publication in a journal that's not considered to be reasonably good in accounting, it's a bad signal for you. If you want to go into the international, if you want to stay in Spain, it's different. That's why I'm saying, where do you want to go? What's your objective long term? What are you targeting for? And how do you want to create a CV that serves the purpose for you of your career, right? And at the same time, doesn't mean that in 10 years' time you have to hide 50% of your CV from both sides, right? You have to eliminate publication.
Because as a student, we meet the very competitive job seeking market.
But in the job market, I mean, you can talk, for example, June with this year in the job market, it doesn't happen. You got a very good offer. I was in the job market 2 years ago. Didn't have any publications at the time. We had many offers, flyouts, Melbourne, Sydney, Amsterdam, Paris. Then it depends on what market you're moving, because in the international job market, they will hire you on the quality of your papers and on the potential that those papers can hit this top one. If you've already published your research in low quality journals, then you have less to offer to these institutions, right? Because they're buying, in a way, your package, as well as your potential for further publication. So it's a better CV without no publication, this is what I was saying, than with very low quality publications. If you want to go into international job market, if you are thinking more in Spain or targeting a specific country where you know the kind of publications that they want me to have, then it's stupid not to, as I said, don't be with your back to reality, right? You need to understand what the game is like, what the pieces are on the table, and then play the game that's being played. Right? Because if you think this is chess, but it's actually something else, then it doesn't make sense. You're doing moves that make no sense. So this is where you talk to your supervisor. You need to make a decision early on of where do I see myself in 5 years' time? What am I targeting? Right? And then, of course, if you aim for the good journals, that's never gonna be a problem. If you have a good publication in a good accounting journal, that's never going to be analyzed. The other strategy might depend on what the final outcome
has some risk, yes.
The risk is you end up with no publication.
When we wait for 3 years or 2 years in reviewing, but it still cannot be accepted, and you will forced to find other opportunities. And
portfolio, right? Where you're targeting several journals, and then it means that if you start one paper per year, by the end of your PhD, you have 4 papers and at different stages. Then you start a new one immediately, 5. This is portfolio that eventually gets up.
And it might be more challenging for our students because we haven't got a position yet. We don't have a job, we don't get salaries, without any income. So the choice is maybe sometimes matter.
I'm not criticizing strategies. We have to be strategic, we have to be intelligent and smart about the game that's being played. But then you have to have your own agenda, right? And your own idea of what questions you're going to ask, where you want to publish, what impact you want to have. And this is separate from sometimes because, right, you realize I have this long-term strategy, this quality strategy. I've only gone for the top journals, but I'm 3 years into my tenure track. I need to shift a bit, change a bit. Then you can come back. So it's like you're driving, right? You go on the fast lane for a bit, and then you say, no, let me now go to the other lane where I can do my own research, have my agenda, take time, dedicate myself to the questions that I want to solve, and then see if I can get those published in good journals. If that doesn't happen, then take pleasure in the journey, in a way.
Recommendation for Spanish institutions. So,
For the government, give us money. I think this system, to me, I think the strategies, and I've been in academia now for quite a few years, right? So this time now we have lawsuits. People are like, oh, lawsuits. I had law. So when law came 20 years ago in 2001, then that's when we went to do our PhD in the UK. Because the law at that time said if you do your PhD in a given institution, you cannot stay. Now, regulatory shocks will keep coming. Every 10, 12 years, you will have a new law, new government that comes with some crazy things. The best strategy is a safe strategy. What is a safe strategy? A good publication. That would stand all kind of craziness from politicians. Whatever they devise, whatever they say, 5 JCRs, 20, whatever, right? You have your strategy, you don't think well, you are in the journals that are, right? Because these lists, they change, right? They come and go. When I started, there was no such thing as this. This journal citation report, it didn't exist until 2010 or so when people started to look at them. So it dominated for a bit, and I think now it's going to go away. Because they've seen this effect, and they are aware that they transfer millions of public money to journals that people can publish 170 papers in a year with very low contribution, right? And it's a waste of public money. So eventually, when is that going to happen? Right? Maybe if you do this for the next 2-3 years, it still pays off. Maybe for the next 5, I don't know. No, but the safe strategy is to actually try to do good research, try to publish it in the good journals that people read, ones where you aim for, if not go down, but don't go right to the bottom, right? Unless, as I said, you also need not to be stupid. But this is not so much when you're a PhD student. When you're a PhD student, the PhD is about learning how to do research. It's not about publishing things. So you should learn how to do, by the time you get the diploma, I can do research on my own. This is what you get out of a PhD, not 3 publications. And so, of course, if you're lucky and you get good publication, that's great. But what we should do is teach people to do good research, and then if they have good research, it will get published. I think eventually, it takes time.
So about so we are thinking about predatory journals, and we can identify clearly some of them. But for example, it has been this money that is has been paid by the government. For example, to good publishers, like Elsevier. So what's the difference between those open access that are on Elsevier and some others? So why would be more recommendable? So
no, but this is, they call it open access, right? And so, but I don't know, because you might not have had any experience submitting to these journals, but the idea is almost that the open access fee is the payment of the publication. So it's not, there's no non-open access option, right? You cannot publish not in open access journals, which is typically in Elsevier, right? And typically they will put it in open access because our institutions also have agreements, our libraries, with Elsevier and all these big companies, so it still ends up in open access, but you only pay the fee if after it's been accepted, and then only if you want it to be open access. Well, these other journals, what you pay is the fee up front or almost with and it's implicit that it will be published and you cannot opt out. So it becomes a fee that you pay, which is goes together with the open access, right? But it's in a way a payment for the quick publication. This is the business model that these editorial lines have come up with, right? You pay me 2,500 euro and I'll get the paper to it. And then it's questionable, right? What in these 2 weeks time, you can get feedback or not. And sometimes the process is as you would expect, I think. I've not submitted, but you get reports and you reply, and sometimes it's just like immediate acceptance of the paper. So I think you cannot always say, and this is also what I'm saying, that I'm not against doing a strategy, right? If you think your paper, and if you like your paper, if you think the paper has contribution, and for whatever reason you chose to go to a quick journal because you need that for your sexennial, then you still would not hide the paper, right? You would be proud of your paper and you say, this is my best paper. And I published it in this journal. It was a fast start journal. I did not choose the other journal simply because I was pressured for time and I needed this publication. And you don't have to be, it's not a problem, it's a good research still. The problem this system creates, because it's so fast, then you end up with this overproduction of quality of papers that are of relatively low quality, or papers that are crafted exclusively for the purpose of obtaining the publication, right? It's not a research paper that you would think of an idea, I think this is interesting, let's do the research. But no, you need a publication, so you do the paper, right, and get it through. And for the purpose of obtaining the sexennial or whatever it is, right? And so this has raised this concern, because when you observe what's happening, one, the massive amount of publications, in some cases with low scientific consent, to the transfer of money from the government to these institutions, then it even reaches the public. It's a concern that at universities, what are you doing? Right? What kind of research are you conducting, and why are you dedicating taxpayers' money to? But it's a very profitable venture. You get the sexennial accreditation, then you're a catedrático, 6 sexenios. So I understand, right, what has happened. But I'm saying, because I understand, and a lot of people also understand, I think potentially it might not be what we want to do, which is to do good research that addresses questions that are of importance to society, that contributes.
So just to say, okay, so this is, you have to pay or you don't have to pay, so that you have to check what is the real.
Now change 5 contributions for the titularidad, right? You send them 5 papers and you explain what the contribution is, what the process is. So it encourages you in the time it takes you to produce these 5-6 years when you work from your ayudante doctor into a request for titularidad. It doesn't avoid that some people will have 170 papers in each of those 5 years, but if you only have to submit 5, then maybe you're discouraged in terms of the other 600.
These 5 papers are going to be evaluated by the commissions?
Yes. So 5 papers, it's like a case. Yes. You say, this is my paper, and you can have it here, no? And then you...
And specifically, what is the contribution of your paper? References, thank God, are finally getting relevance to type.
Yeah, but with the problem If you have a paper that is been published in the last year or the period, probably
But I think that's why it's very good to show your paper in other platforms as a working paper and SSRN. I think the papers are our brand, are the way in which we construct who we are.
The alternative to be, well, it's super easy now with Aneka, right? I'm going to get this guy will get the 5 papers in 5 weeks. No, not even that, because it's 10 weeks. So in 10 weeks, right? Like, done. Now, for the next 5 years.
But my question is that if it's going to be like to assess individually each one of these papers.
I think the prior system quite clearly incentivized both the emergence of these predatory editorial lines and journals and the submission of the paper, right? Because you had this pressure for quantity, right? So you had to produce that given number of papers, and joined with this problem we're mentioning that's so hard, it takes so long to publish in the accounting journals.
The quantity, because they didn't eliminate the quantity. And the subjectivity of the.
Well, we'll see. That's what I'm saying. We'll see. And we'll see if it's the same thing, but I do see changes, right? That go in a different direction and that seem to try to tackle the issues that have emerged because of this prior objectivity, right, in the system. That is, give me the number and
the papers might be the ones who have
it might not change anything. So
say the figure that we have to pay for each sustainability article, because I manage the invoices, and it's 1,700 per article that the universities have to pay to publish in sustainability. I don't think it's fair, neither for us as an academics, neither for taxpayers, neither for the public universities. So I'm happy that the system is changing. Because we're throwing money away. Is 1,700 what you have to pay to see your article published? I think that's completely ridiculous.
And without any
money. It's 1 month salary of un ayudante doctor. That's what you have to pay to be your article published in a sustainability journal. That I really I question the impact that is going to have to society. So, and not only the monetary cost, but also the opportunity cost of investing so much time in a paper that is not going to have a real impact, whereas you could have invested all your time in a good research.
It's more you said about
it's just clarifying the point, what is a predatory and what is not. It's not about paying or not. Sustainability publishes 10,000 articles per year. Time to publication is 1 to 2 weeks, and reviewers are set to review the paper in a single week. Then, if you are a reviewer, you obtain a voucher for a next publication of your paper in the editorial. So it's about the quality of the control quality of the reviews, not about whether you pay or not. We have many journals and you may pay for open not open access. It's the editorial policies and the quality of the reviews. Take a look at many papers published in these journals and you will see that this is not a paper.
Yeah, but I cannot say nothing about the process because it's.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say
they listen to the report and they pull it. So they actually pulled the report. They retracted it themselves because it created a lot of tension and conflict, and people were unhappy because they don't like the picture, right? Because they say, I've published 10 of these, and I don't like to be in this picture. I'd like you to tell me that these are because my work is good. I've done it in good.
I mean, I need this in the webpage. Look, it's a academic field.
But I'm just saying, right, that this was the first question, why do we do research? if you do research to get 170 publications per year, you can do it. It's doable. This guy in Carnica, he's doing it. We can all do it. Now, is that what you want? Right? Is this the social outcome of research? Is that why we're working so hard on learning how to do research? Is that why we want to tackle these important questions to society? Because we just want to produce and produce and produce, right? Like we are, or we are actually wanting to tackle important questions, do research, and then get publications.
Yeah, in
my views, everything is my views.
We also have to reflect as institutions, as society, and this is a
waste of talent, because we have all these very well-trained people, smart people, who are wasting their time in doing tiny contribution studies just for the purpose of getting their sexennials and
it's like it should be penalized.
But this is what may be coming in the future, right? That you get penalized. And I know this, for example, I'm part of when we evaluate projects for the Ministry of this request for the Ministry of Education, I do this, I'm in these committees, and I write to people who are doing these strategies. And of course, because accounting, I try to favor accounting and finance, so I try to be very positive in terms of the contribution, etc. But these comments you might receive even if you get the project, right? Things like, be careful because these publications are not helping you, because in these discussions that are happening right now in the ministry when these committees meet, these type of publications are thrown upon. They're seen as very bad signals. You might not get funding from the ministry when you ask for your proyecto de excelencia from the ministry if you have this kind of publication. So, and this is because it's led by the economics people, and the economics people are leading us in terms of being very intolerant towards these kind of practices, right, which are more common in business. I think we've done more of this in business than in economics. And so this is the construct. Increasingly, and we even have in the last meeting, the last year when we did this round of giving projects to people, there was a person from the ministry who was typically there sitting there just by reminding this thing about the CVs and the publications. An administrative person, an academic. And she was there in the background. At some point, someone mentioned something to do, and she turned off her camera. It's like, I'm here listening to this, and you should not discuss this point. So it's implicitly, I see it, the trend shifted, that this will not only be not rewarded, but penalized if you have this kind of CV when you ask for something, this funding from the ministry. So, but we'll see where this ends. Yeah, no, we're over time massively. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.